Hello, everybody. My name is Dean Harbry, and I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, and glad to be a part of the group today at the Orthodox Christian Leadership Initiative. And we have a lot to talk about, so I hope in these next few minutes we can capture the heart of our subject matter today. So I'm also the president of our parish council at St. John the Wonder Worker in Grant Park, so I bring greetings from all the brethren here in Grant Park as well. In addition to that, I'm president and COO of a boutique financial services firm located in Buckhead, and we have offices here in Atlanta as well as Charlotte, North Carolina, and we're engaged in financial services. We're an investment management firm. Prior to that, for the past 18 years, I've been an executive coach. I've had my own coaching company called Internal Innovations, and in that company, our company has worked with probably over 140 nonprofits in board development, as well as probably just the same amount of for-profit companies in leadership, professional management skills, and things of that nature. And what's really interesting about my job is that I've been able to, in a sense, ride on the backs of a lot of people. I tell people I'm like a mouse on the back of an elephant. I get a great view of the jungle, but it's not my own size or stature that really helps me with that. So it's been a really interesting journey to partner with organizational leaders on issues of leadership, staff development, business best practices, things of that nature. And one of the things that we've done as a company is that we established this paradigm that we really took from the Orthodox Church, and that was to help people have a model to live by, both from a cultural perspective inside of a business as well as personally in their life. When people would ask me, well, why are you a coach? Why do you do what you do? My answer was, because whatever happens at work, we take home, right? So if I go home and I, kick the dog, yell at the kids, and ignore my spouse, chances are I had a pretty bad day at work. And so what we decided to do as a company is to try and import some of these Orthodox principles into the workplace. And so who better to go to for that than the church? And so what we did is that we did a deep study there and found that there is a wealth of information. We do a lot of study in our current age on emotional intelligence, which is a fantastic subject. It's like science has proven what the church and the scriptures have taught us for many years. But if you go back into the church, you see the church had this already addressed with a paradigm they called the middle way. And there's just a host of church fathers that have guided us in this direction. In fact, Basil the Great, Basil of Caesarea once said, "The upright in heart have thoughts that are inclined neither to excess or deficiency, but are directed toward the mean of virtue." And so what he described here is what the church ultimately and throughout history has called the middle way. Another part about my job as an executive coach, it was interesting to see the different views of people and where that led them in their life. I remember asking the question, what is your expectation of life? Should life be easy or should it be hard? And interestingly enough, it'd be about half and half. Some people say, hey, I think it should be easy. For the Christians, the modern Christians that say, yeah, well, if we have God's blessing, then we should be able to experience blessing and, abundance at all times. And then the other half would say, no, I really expect life to be hard because, to have any other expectation only sets me up for frustration. And so we see that when you turn to the scriptures, we realize that struggle is an ordinary part of life. And as Orthodox Christians, we are implored, in a sense, to embrace the struggle, right? To know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings. And so what I'd like to do today, again, is just to give some practical examples of where we face that struggle and what we do as a result. Well, I mentioned that I was from Atlanta, Georgia, and Atlanta's known for two things. One is for hot weather. It's Hotlanta, that's what we call it in the summer, and this summer time right now is no different. It's been really steamy and hot. The other thing is Atlanta traffic. I mean, we make the top 10 of the worst commutes of all U.S. cities consistently. So we have really bad traffic in Atlanta. In fact, you have to pretty well plan your day around traffic. So you can't go in at the normal time if you're driving to work, or come home at the normal time unless you want to just sit for hours in traffic. So I'd like to tell you about a little traffic example that I had. So I live in Grant Park, real close to our parish. As the crow flies, it's only probably 1.5 miles, 2 miles away. So we love being very close to our church. But every day up until the COVID crisis, I would have to drive into Buckhead in order to go to work. So I would go down Martin Luther King Drive. You're probably familiar with that name. And it was from that place that I would get onto the highway connector every day. And so, you know, when you live in the city for a while, you learn how to drive in the city, which is different than the suburbs. And so what we would do is, people knew this, right? You line up on the side of the road on the right-hand lane, and you wait to get onto the ramp so that you can get onto the connector and then drive north. And so it's always jammed up all the time. And so as a good Atlanta citizen, I was waiting for my turn to get onto the highway. And this one particular day, as I was waiting, okay, it was finally my turn. And there was this car that came out of nowhere. And this guy screeched in front of me, cut me off, forced me to slam on my brakes, and basically cut in line. All right, so that was not a very pleasant event. And I remember what went through my head at the time. It was like, man, if I had rockets installed on the front of my car, I would have blown the guy to smithereens and kind of give him a taste of what I was feeling in the moment. And then the Lord Christ and his lovely saints intervened in my life in some way and basically caused me to pause. And they reminded me that this whole principle of the middle way requires a different response from us. And so I remember sitting there and, you know, huffing and puffing. It's like, you know, what do I do here? And it just came to me that I needed to really approach this person with grace and mercy. And so I learned to ask a self-coaching question in that moment. And here's my self-coaching question. I said, okay, under what circumstances would this behavior be okay with me? All right, so I took a second as I was still inching my way to my turn to get onto the highway. And this is what I came up with. It was like, well, if this person had just gotten a phone call and his mother was sick at Northside Hospital, just north of the city, and he had less than an hour to get to her bedside to say her goodbyes, and so he was rushing through traffic to get to Northside Hospital. If I knew that was his story, how would that change how I reacted? And my reaction would have been, oh my gosh, no, please, cut in front of me anytime. It's okay, don't worry. Make sure you go and see your mother. And so what I realized was the way that I looked at that situation, the way that I approached that situation actually made a difference in my own response. And one was from the middle, the latter. My self-coaching question helped to lead me to more middle way behavior, whereas the other one was really more about me getting my own judgmental needs satisfied by seeing the guy suffer. Really, I had thoughts of envy, and let's remember that envy is when we wish harm on another person. And so it kind of reminded me of that verse in Romans that says, you know, wretched man that I am, you know, who can deliver me from this body of sin and death? And thanks be to God through Jesus Christ our Lord. And so that's just a little bit about kind of a framework of my own personal experience in the middle way. But what I'd like to do is just take a little bit of a deep dive now on what the middle way is. We've had other people in history that have talked about this. The idea actually didn't originate in the church, you know, at Pentecost or something like that. One of the most notable people who talked about the middle way was Aristotle. And he described the middle way as the golden mean, or the golden middle. And the middle way being the mean between two extremes, and that the middle way represented virtue. And I don't think Aristotle was necessarily a religious guy, but But basically what he said is that human beings are happiest when they live in virtue. And this is how he defined virtue. He said virtue was just that place where we are settled or experiencing life, in a good way. So, to start off here, I'd like to just describe, well, where do we find this in Scripture then? And frankly, we do have some paradigms there. One of my favorite is in Genesis chapter 4, and we all know the story of Cain and Abel and how they both brought their offerings to God, and one is acceptable and one was not. And so Cain's wasn't, and it was interesting because God approached Cain in Genesis chapter 4 and said, hey, why are you angry? And why is your countenance fallen? If you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? But if you do not do well, sin is crouching at your door and its desire is for you, but you must master it. This is one of the first indications in Scripture that I've found that really speak to the middle way. Because if you think about it, it's like, well, think about it for a second. The imagery in Hebrew is that of a wild animal perched at the door, and its desire is to lunge after you or to devour you based on you opening the door. So put yourself in that place, right? So you open your front door, there's a lion sitting there, and it's about ready to perch and to lunge after you to devour you. What's the normal human response at a time like that? Well, if it were me, I'd either want to run like crazy, not knowing that a lion can run a lot faster than I can, so that's probably not going to help. Or maybe I have something next to my door, like a bat or something that I can beat the lion with and win that battle. So, our tendency is to either fight or flight in a moment like that. And what's really strange about this is that God was asking him in that moment to master the situation. Now, what does that mean? Okay, in a sense, what God was asking Cain to do was you need to find a way to look into the eyes of this lion, become a lion whisperer, and find a way to shoo him away. That's in a sense what he was pointing towards. And it's well, dang, how easy is that? I'm not sure that I could do that. And yet that represents the struggle that we all have when it comes to dealing with the middle way. So if we use that model, that the middle way is the place of virtue, okay, and excess or abuse, or we lean towards deficiency, which is more like abandon, it's we're either in the middle, we're either in the middle or we abandon or we abuse. It's either deficiency or excess, and that's how we approach it. Well, if you go back to my driver scenario, right, when I was lined up to get on the highway, I basically had three options. My first reaction was to abuse. I wanted to curse the guy. I wanted to see harm on him. Well, what would the abandon or what would the deficiency been? What was my second possible response there? Well, I could have just ruminated on it and been mad all day and treated everybody around me like they were that person, right? Or I could find a way to bless him, right? I could find a way to let him off the hook. And you know what? This is a Christian practice. And the way I like to say it is love is a form of chosen blindness. Love is a form of chosen blindness. And rather than hold this person accountable for their sins, like Stephen being stoned, I want to say to him, hey, or say to God, hey, forgive him of his sins, okay? Do not hold this sin against him. And that really is the Christian response. But I'd also like to take this a step further to talk about some business context as well. So here's an example. If we looked at the subject of conflict, we realize that there is an abandon or an abuse, a deficiency or an excess, and we either tend to be more passive or aggressive in conflict. But the middle way of conflict is really being assertive. And here's what I mean. So if I had a dispute with my wife and I decided okay, never mind, whatever, I'm just going to forget about it all. I'm going to suck it up and forget about the whole thing. If I did that, and took more of a passive approach, my question is, well, what kind of an impact would that have on my relationship with my wife? Chances are, wouldn't help, right? Because I'd ruminate, and what's the shelf life on a rumination? It's like, it's years and years, right? And I would just live with that for a long time. And my wife would probably come to me and say, hey, is there anything wrong? And I'd say, no, I'm okay, never mind. It's fine, and really that's not true. Or maybe what I would choose to do is take more of an aggressive approach and say, are you kidding me? Do you know what you did the other day? And I just can't believe you would do that. And I would take a very aggressive and abusive or excessive kind of approach. But I have my third option, which is to be assertive. So imagine if I went to my wife and I said, honey, look, in our family meeting the other day, when you made this decision, you didn't really check with me, and it kind of caught me off guard. I felt really disappointed and disenfranchised because I'm not sure that I really totally agree with that, but hey, what is it that we can do to try and do this together? Is there any possibility that next time we could find a way to discuss this? And if I resolve conflict in that way, what happens to a relationship? Comes together, right? Gives you a chance to really work it out. I love to use another example, which is the example of control. And so, what is the middle way of control? The middle way of control is influence, where we have the ability to help people, okay? So to many people, control sounds like a dirty word. But if I say influence, and what is influence? Influence is when we're trying to get people to do something that they may not want to do, but it's in their best interest. One of the best examples I have is that, we have 4 kids, and when they were, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, right? They didn't want to brush their teeth before they went to bed at night. So, it's like, well, what do? Right? You buy a Mickey Mouse toothbrush and use some bubblegum toothpaste, but you try and make it a fun exercise because they really need to learn how to brush their teeth. And if I was being a good dad and decided, hey, I'm not going to put that upon them and didn't require them to brush their teeth, they're going to be pretty angry at me when they're 18 years old and don't have any teeth in their face. So bottom line there is, we need to help people do the things that they may not want to do because it's in their best interest. But the abuse or the excess of control is manipulation. When we're trying to get people to do something at their expense for our own personal benefit. And I think many of the organizational leaders that I worked with really struggle with this problem. They may have had good intentions, but they would use methods that would make people feel like they're being manipulated. And I like to say this, it's like, I don't care if you're the Pope or Mother Teresa or whoever, but if you feel like you're being manipulated, what are you going to do? You're going to resist, right? It's like the movie My Cousin Vinny. It's like, talk to the hand because the face ain't listening. And so that's what happens. But the abandoned side or the deficiency side of this is really to abdicate our responsibility, right? So if we have 2 employees that are out on the front lawn of our office building and they're just duking it out, and one has a broken nose and the other one a broken finger, and everybody's all bloody, and I say to myself, they'll work it out, they're just having fun. That's not real leadership either. Okay, so we have these different postures that we can have that help people know kind of what are the boundaries of good behavior. That's why, at our company, we made this statement that method trumps message 100% of the time. And you can say almost anything that you want to say about another or to another person as long as you do it the right way. And so this becomes kind of a modern way of trying to figure out how do we stay in the middle. So the last thing I'd like to talk about along the business context front is our disposition. This is really an important factor for us, particularly in leadership. We've often said in our coaching business that we need to work really hard to develop executive presence. And most people, when you use that word, they don't really know how to define executive presence so well. But it is the presence, the gravitas that we bring into the workplace. And really, the paradigm here of executive presence is really just spiritual maturity as well. And this is where this whole idea of disposition comes to play. And what we're saying is that the disposition of somebody who is spiritually mature, the disposition of an executive professional is one of curiosity. This is really more of a middle way feature of somebody that's in leadership. The abuse or the excess is somebody who is more judgmental in nature. Or the abandon is the person who's more detached. And so what we're really looking for here is what it means to be in the middle. When I'm doing a workshop on this, I often like to ask my people, like, how many of you like hanging out with judgmental people? Raise your hand. Strangely enough, nobody raises their hand. And when you ask them the question, they'll say, well, I just don't want to be judged. You know, so what does it mean to be led by a disposition of curiosity? And if you really think about it, curiosity is the antidote to being judgmental. If we're judgmental people, the way that we get over that, the way that we build empathy, the way that we demonstrate Christ's character more is by maintaining a disposition of curiosity. It's just like my illustration of the guy who cut me off in traffic. I wanted to judge him, and oh my gosh, I was just so ready to do it. But finding that self-coaching question to ask, you know, under what circumstances would this be okay with me? It was clear that, okay, I can find a reason to let him off the hook. When we do that, because remember, love is a form of chosen blindness. When we find a way to do that, we go out of the realm of the abuse, of the excess, and we come back to the middle by maintaining a disposition of curiosity. And so when you ask the question, it's like, you know, what are the differences here? How do we know when we're in or we're out when it comes to the middle way? Here's one key indicator. And you're going to love this, I think, if you've done any study on emotional intelligence, right? We're coming from the middle when we're engaging with positive emotions, okay? It's when we take the bait on negative emotions that we either end up in abandon or abuse. And here's what I mean by that. If I take the bait on a negative emotion and I internalize that negative emotion, I'm going to be hanging out in that deficiency, the abandon column, right? It's just like the illustration I used in conflict. If I went to my wife or I had an issue with her and I thought to myself, forget it. I'm just going to suck it up. Never mind. Forget it. You know, I'm just not going to think about it. I'm going to ignore it. And if I take the bait on that negative emotion, I just ruminate over time. But it means that I'm not operating out of the middle. If, on the other hand, I take and externalize my negative emotions, using the illustration of conflict in my wife, and say, we're going to have it out, and I'm getting really aggressive about it, okay? It just means I'm not in the middle. And so being in the middle means that we've learned how to do what Daniel Goleman calls emotional self-management, but what the church has said is apatheia. Apatheia is that middle place. And apatheia in biblical Greek doesn't mean the same thing that apathetic would mean in the English language today. In English, it means like, I don't care. But in biblical Greek, it means that I'm in the middle. I'm not overly rocked one way or the other. I can stay steady. I can stay in the middle with respect to the way that I'm presenting myself. But then, of course, you know, people ask the question, well, does that mean that I can only have positive emotions? And is that very human to do so? And the answer is, well, of course not. You know, we're all human beings. The real difference here is what we do with those emotions, okay? So it's one thing to have those emotions and learn how to describe those emotions when things get tough versus demonstrating those emotions. So we have a whole database of middle way terms that you'll be able to see at the end of this presentation. But here's the deal. If I go back to what happened with my wife, and when I was trying to be assertive and come from the middle way, if you remember, I said to her, hey, honey, hey, you know, when you made that decision on our family meeting, it really frustrated me. It made me feel like I was being disenfranchised. So that's why we're saying that when we're engaging with emotion, we need to learn how to describe those emotions in order to be in the middle versus to demonstrate them or disguise them. Okay? Because if you're demonstrating emotions, you're in that abuse column rather, and to demonstrate is abuse. And so we just need to make sure that we learn how to describe them. And that's really the discipline of apatheia. It's how we stay in the middle. It's how we grow in our salvation walk. The other thing that's really important to know about this is, how does this relate to Christ's commands? Have you ever thought about it this way? Christ's commands call us to be in the middle. And think about some of what he says, right? In the scriptures, it says, count it all joy when you encounter various trials. I don't do so good at that one. Okay? When I encounter a trial, it's like, I want to get angry and get mad about it because this isn't the way it's supposed to be. Remember, it's my view that life ought to be easy, perhaps. Or I may want to curl up in the fetal position and not see anybody on the outside for weeks at a time. What does the Bible say we should do in that case? The scriptures say we need to learn how to be joyful, right? Count it all joy when you encounter various trials. Well, let me ask you a question about that. You take a look at every one of Christ's commands, and you tell me that when we're following Christ's commands, what is our emotional state at a time like that? It's coming from a positive emotional state. Okay? Think of, in everything give thanks. This is what the scriptures tell us to do. Again, what it's saying is, if bad things happen to you, if you had a flat tire on the way to work today, the scriptures tell us, give thanks. How easy is that to do? It's really difficult, because we're either going to want to curse the situation or withdraw. Okay? So it's not easy to follow Christ's commands. It's very difficult to follow his commands. But when we understand this concept of the middle way and what it means to be in the middle, it helps us to neutralize those negative emotions and live the way that Christ instructed us. So please understand that we have modern emotional intelligence, which is an amazing study, but the church had this covered in the principles of the middle way. And remember the one we talked about before in Genesis, where it said, when sin is knocking at the door and its desire is for you, what is it that you should do? Shouldn't fight. That doesn't work. Doesn't help to flee. That doesn't work either. We need to learn how to master those circumstances. So I just want us to keep those things in mind when we're talking about the middle way. So then after that, it's like, well, what do we really do with all this? What can we do, or what do we want to do? And I want to briefly describe a couple of concepts. Number one is we want to stay in the balcony. Why do I use that metaphor? We have the luxury of having Fox Theater about 2.5 miles away from our house. And before COVID hit, my wife and I, we would hit that place every once in a while. But what's interesting about being in the balcony of the Fox Theater, you realize that all the drama happens on stage. It doesn't happen in the balcony. And the balcony is a place where we observe human behavior. And in many cases, we can even laugh at it because it's so predictable. But it's a way of detaching from those circumstances. And think about it. If you're ever in a state of negative emotion, if you're having trouble with a peer, trouble with a child or a spouse or a family member, it's because we're living on stage. We got dragged onto the stage of drama and we're playing it out like we would a stage play. If we want to stay in the middle, even if we have to crawl to get there, we have to find a way to get to the balcony, because it's just a place of observation versus a place where emotional drama plays out. So I had a slide here that talks about how language connotes location. And you can tell just by the way you're thinking or just by the way you're talking, whether you're in the balcony or not. The second thing is that I'd like for us to do is to think about adopting the mindset of a doctor versus a judge, okay? And what's interesting about this paradigm is that a judge and a doctor can see the very same thing, but they just approach a situation in a different manner. If I have a bullet wound in my shoulder and I go before a judge, what's he going to say? It's like, well, who done it? Did you put yourself in harm's way? Is it your fault? He's looking for somebody to blame. He wants to apply consequences. If you walk into a doctor's office with a bullet wound in your shoulder, what's he or she going to say? They're going to say, hey, where's it hurting? Don't worry. We're going to have you fixed up in no time. You're going to be feeling better, and we're going to do everything possible to make sure that you're back doing normal business as quickly as possible. Their focus isn't on assigning consequences, but it's applying healing. And that's why every day when we get out of bed, we want to put on our doctor's uniform so that we can be the healing agent in people's lives around us. Rather than the judge's robe, where all we're looking for is somebody to accuse and some way to apply consequences to somebody else's life. The other thing that I would mention is that we also really need to learn how to best look at the people around us. I oftentimes use the illustration of, if I had two people sitting across the table from me, and one was a criminal that had just broken into my neighbor's house next door, and maybe they turned over the old lady in a wheelchair, kind of beat her up, gave her a bloody nose and a broken arm, and took all of her money and jewelry, and that person was sitting across the table from me, what would I want to see happen to that person? Okay? I mean, the real me would love to, let me bloody your nose and break your arm. And, we treat him and we want to see consequences occur because the guy's a criminal. But if there's another person sitting across the table and it happens to be a young woman with breast cancer, 3 small children with 3 months to live, how do you feel about her? Right? What you feel are feelings of compassion. You want to help. And what are the chances that she's going to nip at you or bark at you or create a really bad experience for you or blame you for things that aren't your fault? Chances are high. But why is that? It's because she's under stress. She doesn't know how to take care of her kids when she's 3 months from here, in the grave. And so the idea here is that we need to look at people and see them as cancer patients, not criminals. Because the way that we see a person will dictate the way that we treat them. If you see a person as a criminal, you're going to treat him like a criminal and you're going to want to see sanctions. It's the judge. If you see him as a cancer patient, you're going to want to help them heal, even if you get mistreated in the process, because you know what they're facing. You can have compassion in that place. So the last thing I want to say is this, that no matter what we do, some of the best ways to govern our ways of dealing with people, the best way to stay in the middle is to develop a set of self-coaching questions. And I've already mentioned 2, but I just want to review a few of those self-coaching questions that may help you to stay in the middle when you're tempted to go to the right or to the left, to excess or deficiency, to abandon or abuse. And so one of my favorite ones, again, is just to help me stay in the middle, is under what circumstances would this behavior be okay with me? And if I can find any possible scenario that could apply in these circumstances, even though it may not be the truth, right? Because love covers a multitude of sins. Love is a form of chosen blindness. I'm going to choose to believe that. Why? Because it helps me put that person in proper perspective and to treat them fairly. Here's another question that I asked myself, and it is, if I knew that today was this person's last day on earth, regardless of what they've done, how would I treat them? Okay? And how much of what they did to me would even matter at this stage? The more that I can encounter others' negative behavior and apply that question, it helps me to do hopefully what Stephen did when he was being stoned. Lord, forgive them. Do not hold any of these sins against them. Okay? And that's what helps me to live in the middle. Another question I like to ask is, how can I be this person's medicine to help them to heal from whatever maladies they're experiencing? And you know what life is like. We have the uphill battle of dealing with family of origin, past experiences, things that have shaped us as children and adults that make living life difficult. And the more that we can see ourselves as being a healing agent to them, the better off we are. The last question I like to highlight here is one that I try and practice, which is to ask the question, what do they need right now? Here's the magic behind that question. If we're encountering a difficult circumstance with a person, and I can ask the question, what do they need right now? Automatically what happens is, it's like a Philippians chapter 2 thing, right? It's like our thoughts go off of self in meeting our needs, and they transfer to the other person. How can I meet that person's needs? And if I can do that effectually, hopefully I'm living in love. I'm not worried about myself, but I'm trying to love and care for the people around me. So to the degree that we can learn to apply some of these self-coaching questions, it can really help us to stay in the middle. I just want to leave that with you. We have a couple of extra slides here that you, hopefully that you can digest. They're slides of a, kind of a database of terms just to give you the idea. And it doesn't end here. This is not a final set. It's just a deposit of a principle that our church fathers and the church itself gave us, the church fathers and church mothers gave us to help us to live life, to help us to gain emotional intelligence, to help us to live a spiritual life. And therefore that bleeding out, then we get called good professionals. We get to get labeled good managers, good leaders, people with executive presence because of this. The last thought I'd like to leave you with is this. Imagine what our world would be like if every Orthodox Christian adopted the thoughts, the principles, and the concept of the middle way, and just, strive throughout all of life's circumstances to come to the middle. What would life be like for that person? What would life be like for the people around them? And there's no perfect person, okay? We definitely have to have a journey mindset here and not adopt some sort of a pass-fail system. But if we were able to do that, what impact would we have on our family? What impact would we have on our neighbors? What impact would we have on our community around us? Okay, and what impact would we have even with those who would persecute us for righteousness' sake? Would we be able to shine like Christ and live like him in our day and age like they did the early church? And my hope and my prayer is that we would be able to do that, that we would be able to live like Christ, shine like Christ, and truly be the church in our world today. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen today. I pray God's blessing upon you. Thank you, and God bless you. We'll see you.